in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. Most of our listeners probably have a mental image of what survival means, or what survival training specifically looks like. For some, that looks like camping with the Boy Scouts, right? Like you whittle a spoon so you can, do field craft stuff.
Basket weaving.
Basket weaving. For our military folks, that might look like prisoner of war interrogation and captivity training, like put a bag over your head, slap it around, ask for your launch codes. That's a lot of fun. For cops, survival, I think a lot of times that syllabus and police training looks like defensive tactics program, right? You're fighting a guy in a red man suit, or you're doing some sort of shooting thing. For disaster preppers, that might look like a stockpile of dehydrated cat food and an AK-47 down in your zombie bunker. For some folks, that's primitive skills, like banging rocks together to make fire. The funny thing about the word survival is it's a lot like the word tactical. It kind of means whatever you want it to mean, and whatever you can get people to pay you money for. Tonight, we're going to talk about the basics, like to stay alive, right? The bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. When, for whatever reason, you are cut off from basic services, right? Outside of a house where you have an air conditioner and a heater and a refrigerator, for any number of reasons, right? That might be by choice, like you go on a hiking trip out into nature, or by accident, like you're out on your hiking trip and you fall down a ravine and get hurt and stuck, or a natural disaster like a flood where you were disrupted out from your normal habitat and your normal services. So that's the goal. That's what we're going to figure out. So as a primer for this, I want you to think about survival and the topics we're going to talk about in the terms of context, urgency versus importance, and pace. Context drives a lot of this, right? If you live in Alaska, there are some survival considerations that you're going to need to account for that are probably a little bit different from if you live in Phoenix, Arizona, right? Or in Florida. So that drives a lot of it, and it's the thing that changes, right? It's all of the variables that change from time and place. If you have a hurricane coming in, that is a context. If you're going backcountry backpacking, that is a context. If you're getting ready to do disaster relief, like go into a disaster area, or you're going to travel to someplace exotic. I'm going to go on vacation to West Africa. Good luck, right?
Very different survival picture.
Yeah. So this basic survival stuff is the baseline, right? It's the stuff you got to take care of yourself, to take care of your group, and whoever it is you're trying to help if you're trying to go do relief for somebody, right? And the funny thing about basic is it sounds easy, right? The simple things are hard.
Yeah, it's
this
the
is
fundamental
the stuff. Right? Yeah. So in this, we always have to consider what is urgent. What is the thing I got to take care of right now or I'm going to die? And what's important? What's the stuff that like maybe I can put off, but if I don't get it under control, I'm going to die, right? And those are different things. And that's also very context-based. I would love to give you a priority list, like do this first. And I've seen many of them over the course of survival trainings and checking it out on the web and survival books and field manuals. But that list is going to change, right? It's going to change based on context, where you are, what you're doing. Generally speaking, water is more urgent than food. Generally speaking, protection from the elements is more urgent than water. But that's situation dependent. The thing about saying like it depends, it's a cop-out answer. You don't get to just say it depends. You have to understand what it depends on. I like saying you got to understand what makes it complicated so that when it's time to make it simple, you can make it simple, right? A lot of this, the context, depends on weather, right? How hot, how cold, how rainy, how windy, how dry. It also depends on the presence of injuries and illnesses. If you have cholera, you're going to need more water, right? And it depends on the degree of isolation you're in. Do you have a neighbor you can reach out to? Or are you 100 miles from nowhere or 1,000 miles from nowhere? That's going to drive some of this, like what's urgent, what's important, right? And when we're dealing with anything important, I want some backup, right? So the military way of saying having a backup plan is called PACE. That's primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. Another one you'll hear in survival, sometimes I think the scouts sometimes use this phrase, is rule of threes. Anything that's really important, you need to have 3 ways to get there, okay? If you need it, you need some kind of a backup for it, right? Primary, this is your core plan. Alternate, what if something goes wrong? Contingency, something goes really wrong. And emergency, push comes to shove, this is how I'm going to get myself out of this trouble, right? PACE. And I want you to have those options separated by a good bit. What I mean by that, if I tell you need 3 ways to make a fire, I don't mean that you need to carry 3 Bic lighters in your pocket, right? I need you to have redundancy in such a way that if they get smashed, you got something else that's going to get you a fire, right? I want you to know and practice 3 different whole ways to make a fire. And I want you to have whatever your tools are dispersed in such a way so if one is lost or destroyed, you haven't lost everything.
So I want to talk about the PACE thing for a second and just give some sort of example of what we mean when we say when we have a PACE plan, right? Because you're talking about the layers, and it's not just options. It's not just one way or the other. It's also like kind of the level of desperation. So let's say you're out on a hike and you're going to need help, right? And your primary way of getting help is to use your cell phone, because a lot of the places that you might hike nowadays have cell service. And for whatever reason, that cell service, you're down in a canyon or something and it's not there. What's your alternate plan? Well, your alternate plan might be go back to the car and, or to a known place that you have cell service. Maybe there's high ground. Maybe there's somewhere on your trip you had cell service along the way. And your alternate, if you don't have cell service when you need it, is to get to a place right? A contingency might be before you left, you made some plan with somebody that, hey, if you don't hear from me by X, that means I'm in trouble. This is where I'm going to be. Send help. That would be a contingency, right? And then an emergency plan, if shit's really gone sideways, how am I going to get help? Maybe you've got, I don't know, flares and whistles and signaling mirrors, or you set the forest on fire or something, right? To really blow it up and find help. But the idea is those layers are, okay, I've got like a main way, I got a backup way. And then if I become more desperate, like things are more dire, then we need to like step that up a little bit. So that's kind of the idea.
Sometimes at work, we use the phrase break glass, right? Break in case of emergency. Like this is the thing I'm only going to tip if it's real.
Yeah.
Right.
And like that emergency plan, it might not be, and I use the examples of like something super primitive. That's just, I'm just throwing stuff at the wall right now. But that's kind of the idea is like, what's your red button, and similarly, like maybe that plan is, hey, if I need help, I'm going to call 911 and just leverage the standard emergency services, something like that. That's my primary plan, right? My alternate is if for some reason I can't get through to 911, then I'm going to send a runner, send somebody for help, something like that, right? And then you have your contingency, and like maybe your emergency plan is, you're just going to stop the first person you see and ask them to help you, right? Maybe it's you're going to stop someone on the side of the road, wave people down, go to the Circle K. It's not really your best way of getting help, but it's not nothing, right? Like it's emergency services would be ideal, like legitimate, bona fide, fire, EMS, police, whatever. But if I can't get that, like the Circle K clerk, it's not great, but it might be something, One of the interesting kind of psych mindset exercises that I read about somewhere, it was a framing exercise where you talk to someone. It's sort of one of those mental conditioning things where you ask someone like, hey, what is your, I want you to picture in your mind the image of a survivor. Just use your imagination. Just take a minute and think about what does the image of a survivor look like. And if you have them describe what that looks like, often you'll hear something like, someone that's all like beaten up, bruised, dirty, like they just walked away from a plane crash. I picture the scene in Top Gun Maverick where Tom Cruise like punches out and he walks into some farm town and he's like, he just ejected out of this thing or whatever. Or maybe they've been stranded on an island for 154 days or some shit. But there's this image, right? They look kind of like almost defeated, maybe a little scared, maybe a little like tail between the legs kind of thing, right? They've been isolated for a long time. And then you ask that person to do the same exercise with the image of a winner or a champion. And, you might see someone that's like, in an MMA ring, they've got a black eye, swollen lip, bloody nose, but it's a different vibe, right? They're also beaten up, but they're holding their hands up in the air, their heads are held high, they're smiling in spite of the pain, right? They're celebrating, they're invigorated, and everyone's going to have their own mental image of either scenario, so you could figure it out on your own. But the question when it comes to the cognitive framing here is, what are the similarities between those two images, a survivor and a champion? And then what are the differences? Notably, what are the differences? In both cases, they probably had to overcome adversity and work hard and find strength even when all strength is fled, right? But if you are thinking about preparing to merely survive, what that looks like, right? You packed a life raft and now you're just going to pray for the best, versus if you're preparing to thrive, to win, right? You're training hard, you're working hard. There's a lot more vigor in that. There's a lot more motivation and discipline maybe. Because both of those scenarios suggest that you're in a different place in terms of that Maslow's hierarchy stuff, right? In terms of finding your sense of purpose or your highest achievement, meeting your potential. Mere survival is way down here. And then somewhere in the middle, you can just kind of live. You're not just surviving, you're living. But then somewhere at the top, you're thriving. So the reason I bring all this up is because cognitive framing is an important thing in like clinical psychology. If you've ever been to a therapist, you've probably experienced how shifting the way you view things can make a really big difference in the way that you think. And in the things that you think will also shape the way that you behave, right? So for this discussion, why does that matter? If you think about your worst case scenarios, whatever survival situation is going on in your head, your impressions about what that looks like will steer your thoughts and also your behavior. So an example of this is when I'm dealing with the recruit class in law enforcement, just running them through the basic academy. Inevitably, there's a scenario that happens where they get shot. We usually have like a simunition round or UTM rounds or something where they're going to be in a scenario, a suspect's going to pull a gun and they're going to shoot them and this thing's going to hit them in the leg. It hurts a little bit, right? Well, their entire lives, most of them, have watched movies and seen people get shot in movies where they immediately fall to the ground and it's an irreversible death sentence, right? So when the scenario like this plays out in the academy, in their mind, someone gets shot, they go down, and they're dead, and that's it. And often, what happens in a scenario where we shoot them with something is they stop and they go, he got me. Like, I'm dead. The scenario's over. No, that's not how that works. People get shot all the time and they're okay. I know a bunch of people at work that have been shot and they were still in the fight. So we have to reframe that and help them understand that most people that get shot actually survive. Your odds of survival are pretty high. Is it dangerous? Is it scary? Could you die? Yeah. But that's not the thing we want to be thinking about in terms of like pragmatic problem solving when it comes to like, oh, you're in a gunfight and you might take a round. You're still in it. You don't get to just stop and wait and see. So think about those images in your mind and make sure that you have the right attitude going into this, because there is a difference, right? If you see a situation as really bad and you're probably going to die, you're more likely to behave accordingly. If you see a situation as I can win this, I can beat this, right? That's different. And that's what we want you to have.
That's a great point. And mindset is huge here, obviously. And I love the thing about framing. One of my big sayings is you have to reframe every really ugly situation, take your fears and frustrations and convert that into a how question. Okay, I'm missing the lower half of my leg. This sucks. Okay, that's great. How do I make my situation better? How do I get the bleeding to stop? How do I get myself out of whatever the scene is and get myself to help? I got to start asking how. So my take on mindset is that you have to do more than just like say mindset. I've had a lot of instructors over my life be like, hey, you need a positive mindset. I'm like, okay, cool. Thank you. You also have to have a mindset that both deliberately and automatically, so both of those things, evaluates hazards, risks, and options. What could go wrong? How bad could it go if it goes wrong? And what are my options? What can I do about it? You need a mindset that is open to improvisation. My grandma always used to say, true story, well, if you don't have a bread pan, you use a bed pan. You take whatever you got, right, to get yourself through a situation. And there's a level of out of the box that goes with that. And my experience is some people are just kind of wired for that and some people just aren't. Well, if you're one of the people who are not wired for that, I need you to make an effort on this. This is a reframing. Like, nope. Normally we'd follow the procedures, but today we're going to go off script. I know that this, I'm not supposed to use this knife as a pry bar, but today we're going to use this knife as a pry bar because that's what's going to get us out of this situation, right? And on top of that, I need you to have next level resilience. That means that on the worst day of your life, when you're tired and cold and in pain and surrounded by danger and uncertainty, you dig deep, you get from those fears and frustrations to the how questions, and you find something to keep your fire going. Maybe that's humor. Find a way to just make a joke about it. Maybe that's God. You find your faith. Or it's a picture of your kid. Or for some of us, it's just pure unmitigated rage. I don't care what you do, but you've got to find something, right?
So all this being said, philosophically, we understand survival being what it is. There's a bunch to consider here, context and all of that. But this episode in particular, we're going to talk primarily about that other kind of survival, the primitive stuff, right? And one of the big things is a lot of those little tactical lessons that we talk about all the time still apply. But this kind of survival, the one that we're going to talk about tonight, is the one where you like make friends with a volleyball and you rub sticks together to make fire or something. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Jim and I have both had a little bit of experience doing that sort of thing. It's been a while, but we grew up doing that sort of stuff. And one of my favorite books in school growing up was The Hatchet by Gary Paulson. I think I read it in like maybe 8th grade, something like that. It's a novel. It's a fiction about a young kid who gets stranded after a plane crash, and he's got little more than a hatchet to get by with. And with the right time and the right attitude, he figures out how to find, how to get himself rescued and stuff. And I think it's a pretty cool book. It's probably good if you have kids that are in that age. I don't know if schools, maybe that book's been banned or something. I don't know.
Probably.
But if nothing else, even as an adult,
half the schools are banning it because he's trans. Half of them are banning it because he's not trans. Whatever. It's fine. Whatever.
I don't know. Yeah, but
yeah. He's not trans. Just to be clear, this predates a lot of that.
Equal opportunity though. Yeah. But The idea is, even if you're an adult reading that and you're just looking for something to kind of light and entertaining to read, it's a good story and it kind of gets your brain thinking about like the what ifs. It's kind of a cool book.
So one idea I want to really emphasize in this episode is 98.6. I'm not a numbers guy, but that's a pretty important number, 98.6. There is a primitive skills survival instructor named Cody Lundeen, and I think he's in Arizona. Like he lives in like a yurt somewhere in the desert. And he wrote a couple of books that are fun, like they're funny, entertaining books. I recommend them. One of his big points, first off, one of his books is literally called 98.6, The Art of Keeping Your Ass Alive, which I appreciate that.
Fitting.
So one of his big points is that the name of the game is to keep yourself 98.6, meaning that if you don't control your temperature, all your other problems are going to get much worse very fast. When people die in the backcountry, they die of quote unquote exposure. Well, what that usually means is hypothermia or hyperthermia, right? They got too hot or they got too cold. 98.6 to me is a really good reminder that helps me sort out what is urgent versus what is important. Remember, that's one of the big overarching themes of this discussion. If your body is sweating out all your water to keep you 98.6, you need to fix your water problem, and you also need to fix your overheating problem. There's a big saying in survival that to sweat is to die. Okay? If you're shivering because you're freezing to death, you need to sort out fire and shelter right now before it gets colder. And also for the numbers people, that's 37 degrees for you Celsius heathens. But 98.6, it's a big deal.
Yeah, this is tapping into a concept in biology and medicine called homeostasis. And the idea is our bodies are always going to try to adapt or revert to whatever our baseline is and find balance and equilibrium, right? 98.6 degrees is where our bodies function best. And it doesn't take a whole lot of variance to start throwing things off for us. Evolution has made us very adaptable to subtle changes over time. When we try to make big adjustments or corrections, we're not used to being in the snow, for example, or without shelter and proper clothing. That can make it hard to adapt, right? Our bodies can compensate for some time, but if we push too hard, we're going to struggle. So I like the point about urgent versus important that Jim made earlier, because something like bleeding out, we can compensate for a short period of time, then we're going to run into trouble. That's very urgent, right? But the heat management and dehydration stuff, longer term survival takes little adjustments, right? Where you're trying to, finding comfort where you're comfortable is also probably where your body is happy, right? Finding homeostasis, that's really important as well. So things like clothing and shade and warmth or getting and staying dry, all that stuff related to the elements that we're talking about, those are insidious little things that we can adapt a little bit over time. They might not be real urgent, at least in our minds right this minute, but they require our attention because they can creep up on you.
So my son is in Cub Scouts. He's in like his third or fourth week of Cub Scouts. It's very exciting. He has a great den. We're very, very excited about it. And they're getting ready to do their first big like overnight camping trip, which is also cool. And the scout leader talked about they have 6 essentials, like a working flashlight and a bottle full of water and stuff like that. I don't think they're allowed to have knives yet. They have to get like a qualification for that. And I like that. I like the basic essentials that you need to have. And when I think of the basic essentials, I have a little list, a little jingle. And for me, it's the skills and the tools that you need to sort out the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. And we're big on like ideas are more important than hardware, right? So this isn't necessarily a list of things you need to have, right? This isn't a packing list as much as it's a list of things you need to get sorted out. And sometimes it's literally just a thing to carry, right? So my little jingle is, and I'm going to say it fast because that's how I remember it: food, water, fire, shelter, knots, navigation, signaling, sanitation, and first aid. Let me slow down. Food, water, fire, shelter, knots, navigation, signaling, sanitation, and first aid. There's not in any particular order because, again, the order changes based on what's urgent, what's important right then, okay? And someone can, and probably has, made a better acronym or mnemonic for them. I'm sure there's 1,000 of them out there. REI's got a list of 10 essentials, stuff like that. The Cub Scouts, whoever. But those are the bins that I use, that I plan against, and that I pack against. Now, it's easy to get dumb with this stuff. So I want you to also pack your common sense and your good judgment and a buddy.
Good rule for
right?
life.
Have a friend. A friend will help you out with a lot of this. And I want to emphasize, this is not an everyday carry checklist. I don't think you need a fanny pack with like road flares and MREs and 100 feet of rope in it, right? Like, you don't need that.
I know half of our listeners, all 6 of you, are probably running out to REI right now with this in like an AirPod, shopping for that fanny pack.
Yeah. They're like, aw. All right. So a lot of this stuff you can improvise in a pinch. Remember, I want you to be willing to improvise. If you don't have a bedpan, use a bread pan, and vice versa, right? Especially if you have good training. The better your training, usually the easier it is to do that improvisation stuff. So this is mostly a planning discussion. It's the stuff I want you to think about. I want you to ask yourself about, and I want you to have a plan for. Especially when it comes to survival for me, or more importantly for my family, I am not in the business of fair fights. Can I bang rocks together and make a fire? Probably going to take a couple hours, but I could probably do it. I'm confident in my skills, my firecraft skills. But you know what? I'm going to carry a lighter if I take my kids into the backcountry. Right? If I'm not cheating, I'm not trying. I can improvise a tourniquet with fabric and a stick. But why not carry and pack an approved, TCCC Committee on Casualty Care? What is it? TECC?
Yeah, the Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care, COTCCC.
Those people, right? Why not carry a real tourniquet is what I'm saying. Like, can I improvise that? Yeah, but in the time it takes me to improvise that, some victims I'm trying to help are not going to make it. So why not cheat? Pack some of this stuff, right? So starting out with food, because you can tell by my physique, I take that one seriously. Food is kind of a funny one.
He means just a lot of protein shakes and creatine and
that's right.
Red meat.
I just live on creatine. So food's funny in a lot of ways, right? Because most Americans don't need any more of it, to be honest. But it's often a first consideration that people think about in survival. But interestingly, it's usually one of the least urgent issues. Why? Well, we are genetically predisposed to be very worried about starvation. Like, you are hardwired to worry about that. I have many friends who think about food before they think about anything else. They aren't in any danger of starving, but the chemicals in their brain are telling them, hey man, what if we starve? What if we die?
Yeah.
Right? And we also understand that sometimes it takes a while to find food or grow it or catch it or hunt it. So, like I said, we have a lot of programming to sort this out early and often. Now, a few things I want you to consider with food. How much do you need? Right? How much do you need to bring? How much do you need to bring in? How much does your group need? How are you going to get it? How are you going to store it? How are you going to prepare it?
Food is tough because, so there's definitely like an emotional side of it, right? And one thing I want you to think about is if you are going into a situation where you can pack and bring food, think about stuff that's nutrient dense, right? So I mentioned the protein, for example. Like if you've only got like a backpack that you're carrying somewhere and you can only fit so much, try to make the best of the space and the weight that you're fitting in there in case it has to last you longer than you expect, right? Like, it's easy to be like, I could get by with like a couple hot dogs and you could get by for a little bit, but if you're smart about what you pack, it might go a longer way. It's also really hard to conceptualize how much you're going to need for how long, depending on the scenario. Like if you are lost or stranded somewhere and you're like, okay, how do I ration this out?
Let's consider that in a disaster prep scenario, right? How much food do you need to have in your house for a disaster? Do you need a year worth of rations? Well, say you have a family of 4, right? 2 parents, 2 kids. Maybe you have a dog or goldfish, whatever. Cool. Well, push comes to shove, they're all on the menu. But
contingency, primary, alternate, contingency,
plan,
emergency.
Right? Yeah. So, like, what does a year of food look like for 4 people? Well, 4 people times 3 meals a day times 365 days. I know very, very few people who could realistically acquire that or store that. By the way, with spoilage, like even if you got dehydrated, specially packed MREs or whatever, like that stuff goes bad. Even in a climate controlled environment, that stuff goes bad. Yeah. So that is a big lift to pack and store that much food. So you need to have something else, some other way to acquire it. Speaking of acquiring, real quick, I want to talk about food aversions. There's a long list of foods my daughter will not eat. Consider that there may come a time where my daughter needs to get over those aversions and eat the food. Now, is that a fight we need to have at dinner at the pizza place? Probably not. But there may come a time where whatever your food aversions are, you might need to put aside, right? Maybe that cheese that has a little bit of fuzz on it. Well, in our generation, like we don't eat that cheese at all. Most of us toss it out. There may come a time where you're like, not only are you not cutting off the fuzz, you're eating the fuzz. That's how serious some of these situations can get, right?
For real. So back to Jim's point earlier, we can actually go quite some time with very little food. That is true. It doesn't mean it's not going to be a factor at some point. Eventually it will. But the idea here is like, if you are in that kind of survival scenario, you get to problem solve. And that can be helpful as long as you see it as a problem solving opportunity, not as, one of those negative kind of things that you spiral about. All of this is tough to talk about in a podcast, but especially food. Just a couple like quick thoughts I'll throw at you if you find yourself in one of those like wilderness survival scenarios. Eating like leaves and plants and berries and stuff can be super sketchy. If that stuff messes with you, like that will become a real threat to your survival. So the like vomiting and diarrhea, like that will kill you. The dehydration thing will kill you, and we'll come back to that. But if you find yourself needing to do that sort of thing, I would experiment and start small and be very careful because it can mess you up. Bugs and stuff, if you think like eating bugs and grasshoppers, it might help with boredom. It's probably not going to do much for you, but you do you. Enjoy. You're going to do great.
They're not food aversions, right? They're not maggots. They're crunchy rice that moves. They're not worms. They're noodles.
Yeah, framing.
Right? Thump them, muck them down.
For the most part, if it really comes down to it, you probably need to trap and catch critters. That's the skill that you probably need to figure out. And then maybe look for like actual crops, like things that you recognize that grow naturally in the area that you're at. Like if you find an apple tree somewhere or something like that, like, actual food that you know is reasonably safe to eat. No matter what, though, for those kinds of situations, you're also probably going to need fire to cook the stuff and kill the nasties. And I mentioned killing the nasties is really important because of that vomiting and diarrhea situation, which leads us to dehydration.
Yeah. Dehydration, a lot of problems with it. One, it's miserable. And two, it is one of the things that very quickly gets you off of that 98.6 thing, right? If you can't sweat, you can't cool yourself. So water's a huge deal. It's also really heavy. So when you think about water, think about it as a problem in 4 parts. How do you carry it with you, and how much should you carry with you? That's kind of question 1. How do you find more of it? How do you make it safe to drink? And then how do you store whatever water you're able to gather? One consideration, like a lot of people, when they go out into the woods, they wear a Camelback, like the backpack with the bladder in the back. Camelbacks carry a lot of water, which is good, but Camelbacks can also get really gross, especially if you don't clean them and dry them when you're done with them. I've seen people have some character building experiences with that. And it's hard to fill a Camelback out in the field. Like with treated water, you have to figure out some plumbing things to get that worked out.
It's not a good collection receptacle.
Yeah. I tend to carry water bottles because it's convenient, to be honest.
Also,
so consider
just to throw, since we're talking about fieldcraft type survival stuff, water bottles, especially like a wide mouth water container, like big Nalgene bottle, or your, vacuum insulated, whatever, if you really,
my Stanley Cup.
Let's be honest, I'm going to be carrying a Hydro Flask probably, but
yeah,
probably has beer in it, but that's just another conversation. But one of those wide mouth containers is going to be easier probably to collect water with. Also, if you're talking about like a little survival kit, take like a Nalgene bottle, and you can put a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, a lot of the, cordage and fire starting materials and stuff to catch, fishing hooks. You can put all kinds of stuff in like a little Nalgene bottle, and you've got a little contingency,
kit,
right?
Right. You got a kit inside there, right? One filter, they're not paying us to say this, but it's cool, is Sawyer, right? Sawyer Squeeze is a straw style filter, and you can put it on a commercial water bottle, like a smart water bottle, and you fill the water bottle and then you squeeze it through this filter and you just drink out of the filter. I like that a lot, just from a size and weight constraints thing. I like that. So consider, how much water do you need? Do you need a liter of water? How much even is a liter of water? I don't speak metric, right? Well, I would like to tell you to carry a crap ton of water, because that's like all the instructions always say, carry a lot of water. Okay, cool. And I'd love to give you an equation, like you need 14 liters per person per day or whatever. But 14 liters is like 30 pounds of water per person per day that now you have to haul around. So if you're going out for 3 days, now you're carrying 90 pounds of water and nothing else. And I don't actually know very many people who can carry 90 pounds of water.
And that's assuming that you actually need 14 liters, right? Which is...
Yeah. And I made that number up, but the point is water's heavy.
It's a lot of water.
So you probably aren't going to carry that. And then what, right? So if you're not going to carry it, you need to have a plan for where you're going to get more of it. If the plan is to get it out of a stream, consider that a lot of streams are seasonal. It might look blue on a map, but is it going to be blue when you get there? Okay. How do you find it? Well, a lot of that depends on context. In an urban context, that might be like finding a spigot. Okay, cool. Well, you might notice a lot of spigots in commercial places have like anti-tamper knobs that you can't like just twist open, right? So then what's your plan? You may need a unique tool to get to that. In a disaster, you might have water pressure or you might not, though the water's probably going to be funky if you do get water, right? In the backcountry, you might want to know that map well enough to have a basic idea of like where water is likely to be. And you have a sense of where water is likely to be. And then once you find that water, how do you make it safe to drink? Diarrhea sucks. Vomiting sucks. And those are the things that will kill you quickly. So how do you make it safe to drink? That means different things. What is in that water? Is it a germs thing? Is it a dirt thing? Is it chemical contaminants? That's going to drive my next steps.
This is another opportunity to give a PACE example, right? Your primary source of hydration is going to be to carry in the water that you need. Your alternate is to bring a water filter or water purification tablets if that's your thing, or something to boil water with, and you can take it from the stream or the water source that you know or at least expect is going to be there. Your contingency could be if I have to go back for water or hike for water, there's another location I might be able to collect from. I know there's a lake nearby or a waterfall that will for sure have a source, even though I have to walk farther to it. Your emergency plan might be like making solar stills, which you can Google that if you want. But there's a bunch of these like primitive ways that you can kind of collect water from foliage using like Ziploc bags or digging a hole in the ground and try to trap the condensation. It's a lot harder. You could Google about it. It looks like a really neat trick. It doesn't produce a lot, but if you're talking emergency, you
can do it.
It is a thing, right? Like if you have a lot of time on your hands, like the rest of your life to figure it out, it might be a thing you can look into. But again, that's your PACE planning, right? So that takes us to fire. And I mentioned cooking the nasties out of whatever critters you might catch and kill. That also applies to the water thing, right? Filtering and boiling water can go a long way, but you need fire to do it. So there are other water problems that boiling and filtering won't fix, but I would say like a good portion of them, filtering and boiling water will basically take care of you for the most part. One of my favorite gym things back in the day, and we mentioned this, but I was trying to learn all the like novel way of starting fires, like those magnesium fire starter blocks. Those are fun. And taking like steel wool and a 9-volt battery, like rubbing those together. Like there's cool little tricks to starting fire, but it was always kind of one of that like those good moments of clarity when Jim's like, one of these like 69-cent Bic lighters never failed me. So it's again one of those pace kind of contingency things where, all right, like my lighter got lost or it's not working, but there's a car battery and maybe some way that you can make a spark and light a fire, right? So
yeah, and nobody carries lighters anymore. They carry like vapes or some shit. Like, can you make a fire with a vape? I don't know.
Yeah. But he's right, though. Generally speaking, like work smarter, not harder. A Bic lighter is going to do just fine. And it is easy to carry like 3 of them if you needed to. But finding some of those little novel ways is still a good option. You could use like a magnifying glass in the sun and light things on fire. I mentioned the battery and steel wools thing. Those are all cool things. But as I've gotten older, one of the things that I've noticed is a surprising number of people really struggle with building a campfire without using like an accelerant, right? Like lighter fluid or, gasoline or something like that. And despite having the flame available from something like a lighter, people, for whatever reason, really, so I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence here, but we'll talk a little bit about Campfires 101. It's a lot like, well, let's just say you got to warm her up first, before you just go for it.
Fire. Yeah. Well, and one thing is preparation makes a big difference here.
Yeah,
having the stuff, having piles of stuff available, bigger than you might think piles of each of the core materials, I think is going to make a big difference for you. Yeah. So tell me more about warming her up there, Michael.
Yeah. So 3 basic things are required to create fire, right? Fuel, oxygen, and a spark or heat. When it comes to fuels, you need to start small and work your way up before you start laying down these huge logs of wood, right? You need to generate enough heat for something like that to ignite and to burn. So the way you do this is you start with kindling and then tinder, and then you add the fuel. And that's kind of your 3 things that you...
Tinder and then kindling. Tinder's the little fine stuff, and then kindling's like pencil-sized stuff, right?
Yeah, so you can look at this as like you start with something really, really small, and then you just kind of build your way up. And by the way, it doesn't have to be 3 things like tinder, kindling, and fuel. It doesn't. You can do 5 levels of before you lay the big tree log on there. But the idea is like you get something small like dried out weeds and pine needles, something that's really easy to burn, and then you're going to take some sticks. Like Jim said, the pencil-sized sticks. Maybe even you could even start a little smaller than that and build into like bigger sticks. And you get that going, and then you start getting into the bigger pieces of wood that will burn. And the thing about this is don't forget that you also need the oxygen component. So you need to build this and arrange this in a way that allows some air to flow around it. So if you have this little pile of tinder on the ground that, your pine needles or something like that, and you can get that burning pretty well, and then you lay some sticks over it, build a little teepee out of it, you get that going. Once you have your little pile of sticks, you can kind of add stuff to it. If you crowd it, there won't be enough airflow and you're going to drown it out, right? So start small, build up big. Remember that if you're in a climate where like if things are really like wet, right? Like if it rains and stuff, you're going to want to try to find dry materials. And if not, then you're going to probably need more of it. So try to like plan accordingly. I like Jim's point about having big old piles of stuff. The preparation, if you collect all that, goes a long way. What really sucks is like you start to get it going and then it goes out and you got to start from square one. So if you have more of that prep work, more stuff collected on the front end, you'll do a lot better. And like I said, arrange it in such a way that like, remember heat rises. So like the TP idea, keep the airflow and build it up. Some little things that you can do if you need to cheat a little bit, especially if you're in a particularly wet environment, or somewhere for whatever reason where there's not a lot of tinder and kindling, like it's not super abundant, but you still need fuel to ignite for fire. You can, if you know ahead of time you're going to be somewhere like that, you can take cotton balls and soak them in like Vaseline, like petroleum jelly, and stick them in like a Ziploc bag. When it comes time to start a fire, you can kind of pull those apart, spread them out, and those burn really well, especially around your tinder and kindling and stuff. Chapstick will work good for that. You can even like soak some of the, you can like rub chapstick on some of those sticks that you're trying to get going. That will help.
And this
burn.
is an example of improvisation too, right? If you're in a car wreck or a plane wreck, you can use pieces of the car and pieces of the plane. Like, don't forget you got stuff around you.
Absolutely. Paper, like newspaper, like if you, speaking of the car wreck thing, you know, if you know that there's like the owner's manual of your of your car in the glove box, and that's not doing you a whole lot of good in your broken ass car, like you can use stuff like that. And you can also use like cooking spray or something like oil, something petroleum based, and you can you don't want to overdo it because you still need some of that, you know, you don't want to drown out the fire. But if you put like spray a little bit of oil on paper and you get that going, it'll burn a little bit hotter. So that can help cheat a little bit if you need to. And the oxygen thing, you've probably seen people like fan at their fires to try to get those going. You could blow at it. That will help. But really, I think the most important thing is to recognize how big of a deal it is to do the prep work and collect the materials and be patient. You have to be patient, take your time. Too much, too fast, you're just going to drown it out, and it's going to be frustrating. Don't expect to just get a fire going, and in 20 minutes, you're going to cook your meal. It's going to take a little bit of time. That's just a good life lesson.
Got to be patient.
Yeah.
So while you're waiting for it to get going, shelter is probably a good idea. Shelter in this context, to me, means anything that keeps you out of the elements, which includes clothing. Do you have something with you if the weather turns, right? Suddenly hotter, suddenly colder. People always say dress in layers. Okay, thank you. That's true. I usually wear underwear. Thank you. But there are some things to understand about what layers really means. One way of thinking about it is wick, warmth, and wind. Do you have something to wick away moisture? Do you have something that will trap air? And do you have something that will keep wind and water off of you? Okay, wick, warmth, wind. It also means, when we talk about layering, to frequently adjust your layers, right? Swap them out early and often to control your sweat. Remember, to sweat is to die. One useful military mnemonic, as far as clothing goes, is colder. C means keep it clean. Dirt breaks down the fibers, and your dirty clothes don't keep you as warm or as cold. They don't breathe the right way. O, don't overheat. To sweat is to die. L, wear your clothes loose and in layers, right? That's how you're trapping air. D, you got to keep it dry as you can under the circumstances. E, examine. Look for things like cuts and tears. R, repair those cuts and tears. Colder. Your car and your house are both good shelters. If you got them, use them. There are lots of ways to improvise and improve your shelter. The key is to sort that out early while the sun is still up. Remember, urgent versus important. This is one of the things you got to figure out before it gets dark and cold, right? When you can't see and the temperature hasn't dropped. You want some way to keep the sun, water, and wind out, and some way to trap the heat in. Again, 98.6, the name of the game. It's time for some thermodynamics and a little story about the first time I, Jim, got hypothermia. There are a couple of basic ways heat moves. It moves by convection, conduction, radiation. And related but not the same is evaporation. Evaporative cooling is a thing that will change temperatures on you. Heat usually moves from hot to cold. And it usually moves from smaller masses, will change to adapt to the warmer masses that they're next to. So, convection, conduction, radiation. So this one time in survival training, I was doing evasion, which is like a big game of hide and seek, right? You're hiding from the bad guys, you're trying to get rescued. And I was a student, and I take this stuff really seriously. Like, this is the fun part of the military for me. So we're sneaking around in the woods, we're hiding from the bad guys, and we need to hole up for the night to sleep. Cool. We find this little cave just next to a lake. Cool. No bears. That's good. So I have some shelter in the form of that cave, and there's some water available in that lake. Cool. No trees are going to follow me. This is good. The guys get out their sleeping bags and they start snoring, but not me, because I think I'm a ninja. I think they're idiots because they're going to get stuck in their sleeping bags when the bad guys show up. So I just zip up my little field jacket and I try to snooze. And I got colder and colder and colder. The wind blew across the lake. Remember that evaporative cooling thing? It got real cold. and then that cold air convected across me. And I was leaning against the bare rock of this cave, like the floor wall of the cave, in just my camo pants and my field jacket. So all of my 190-pound pink squishy body heat was going into warming up this 100,000 pounds of rock cave. Conduction.
Perfect.
And I was very quickly becoming the same temperature as the rocks, which is not good. Okay. And I got colder and colder and colder. And I had this very freaky moment of panic, right? With this voice in my head, like, you're going to die. Goddamn, do something. Okay. So I open up my sling bag and I try to like spoon the dude next to me because it's the military. It's what we do. And it was
nut to butt.
Miserable. Yeah. It's teamwork. And it was miserable, like really, really miserable. And I felt cold no matter how warm it was for about the next week. Right. So there are lessons to be learned there. One is thermodynamics, right? So putting something between you and the ground makes a big, big difference. Keeping the wind off of you makes a big, big difference. That's why tents are a thing, right? So that should help inform how you approach shelter. Is one is your clothing and one is your shelter structure. And do it when it's light out and do it before it gets real cold, because it's easier to stay warm than to get warm.
This is one of those, and like, not to nerd out too much on this, but when it comes to like clothing and shelter, the word that comes to mind talking about this is microclimate. So like, if you think about keeping the elements off of you, like being inside a tent or a sleeping bag, a lot of that is you're trapping some of your own body heat in there to retain that temperature. And similarly, if you're in the sun, like having long sleeves in sunny environments, so that's as that sweat is kind of coming off and that cooling effect that it has, having more clothing on sometimes is better than less, right? Like you just have to layer it and have the right materials and that sort of thing.
I have a quick story about that. So this one time I was camping in Colorado and we got a blizzard while we were camping. That was a lot of fun. And I had my Camelback as a pillow, which I thought was clever, right? My squishy Camelback pillow. Except when I woke up, my head was against a solid block of ice. So again, like, learning happened. It's fine.
Yeah. On Jim's list of things was knots, and I like knots. Knots are useful life thing, and I think a lot of things become easier if you just already know some knots. I've been, doing like rock climbing and search and rescue type stuff for a lot of my life, and so I think it's a prep thing as well. If you, in terms of survival and risk, if you already know knots going into it, and then you come to a situation where you might need it, like having that figured out ahead of time goes a really long way. So just some staples, and obviously we can't teach you how to tie these, but if you're looking for, like, if you go buy some rope and you want to practice learning some knots, you can go on YouTube or whatever. Some that I would search for, I would learn how to tie some kind of tightening knot, like a taut line hitch, or you could basically use like essentially a slip knot that you can tie around something and then pull the line tight. Think about like making a clothesline between two trees, or tying a hammock right up between two trees, something that you can pull really tight. A taut line hitch is one, something like that, but you need to practice it because this is one that can be a little bit tricky to make it really good. A bowline or a figure eight follow through. Those are very common knots to use to attach to certain things, like attach a rope to a point that are really, really strong and something that can support weight. So bowline, figure eight follow through. A square knot, this is good for tying like two ends of rope together, like two pieces of rope together. A girth hitch and a clove hitch. These are both good for tying things around other things. A fisherman's knot, there's lots of versions of this, but something for attaching things to a rope or line, like think about a fishing hook. There's, again, each fisherman has their own preferred fancy variation of this. Just learn one of them and have that in your toolbox. There's plenty more. You can do knots for days and days and days and days, but that's like 5 or 6 that I think are good places to start. A taut line hitch, a bowline or a figure eight follow through, a square knot, a girth hitch, a clove hitch, fisherman's knot of some variation. I would learn those.
Yeah. So when I say knots, a lot of this is being good with knots is going to be one of the things that helps you improvise, right? And I want you to get good enough at them that you can do it even when your fingers are cold or when you're hurt. I need you to be able to do this because this is the thing that's going to maybe help you get rescued, right?
Or it's hard to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
and I need you to be able to...
Like if you're in a smoky environment or dusty environment, you kind of want to be able to do it by feel, or maybe you're reaching behind or around something and you can't really see what you're doing. Like having some of that quote unquote muscle memory is helpful as well. If you're doing it in a hurry, like you're about to fall off of something and you need to quickly tie off to, like some practice goes somewhere here.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that's going to help you do all the other things, like build a shelter, right? Yeah. So when I say
Catch
knots,
critters.
I don't just mean literal knots. I don't need you to carry around a girth hitch with you. What I mean is cordage. Cordage is ropes, zip ties, 550 cord, duct tape, baling wire, right? There's a reason people talk about in improvisation, baling wire and duct tape, you can fix anything, right? Cordage is a thing you can improvise. You can... turn bamboo into cords and stuff, but it's usually a pain in the ass too. It's usually easier just to carry it. So like carry some 550 cord with you. That's not just a gimmick in the survival world.
Put it in your wide mouth Nalgene bottle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or put it around your wide mouth Nalgene bottle, whatever, right? There's lots of things you can do. As for learning knots, go to a craft store and buy a thing of red 550 cord and a thing of blue 550 cord. And then, you can make little bracelets with your kids or whatever. But the reason I say two different colors is that way you can tell the two different ends apart when you're learning. And go look up those knots on YouTube and practice them until you can't get them wrong. This is one of those things, it doesn't cost much. 550 cords, I don't know, $5 for 100 yards of it, 100 feet of it, whatever. But this can be really useful. And I actually end up using knots quite a bit, like surprising amount when I'm out in the woods.
The 550 cord thing is just useful to have on hand, just around the house. I've got some that I make. I take the core out of the middle of it, and I make like a friendship bracelets for my son. And then like when he loses that one, I can make another one. It takes, yeah. So that leads us to navigation and land nav, like OG map and compass skills. This is like fun because all that math that you learned in school that you never thought you'd use again. You can go to like some of those geometry lessons and take these like math problems and apply it to the real world. It actually kind of makes a lot more sense than something like gross like algebra. Ew. I'm mostly kidding, but the old school map and compass skills, they're kind of fun. They're worth learning, and something to think about if you are ever thinking that you're going to go somewhere and you're going to go buy a map and a compass is it's actually a lot more complicated than you think. When you take this like flat representation of the Earth, right, the map, and you apply it to real life, and then you use magnetic compass, and there's true north and magnetic north, and there's a whole lot, there's actually a lot to sort out in all that. So we're not going to deep dive all of it, but just know that if it's something that you do want to learn and you plan on using, you need to practice and train for it ahead of time. I don't even know where most people would get maps nowadays, but I do want to throw some modern day stuff at you related to like cell phones, right? GPS, this is a common misunderstanding when it comes to using phones and for navigation, right? GPS is a receive-only function. What I mean by that is you can not have cell service, and you can turn your phone into airplane mode, and if your phone can see the satellites, you can still get latitude, longitude coordinates and plot on a map with no cell service in airplane mode, because all it is receiving those signals.
Couple caveats on that. One is you have to have the maps downloaded or your host. So funny thing, Verizon, a week or two before we recorded this, had a big outage. And my Google Maps went totally tits up. Just didn't work at all. Generally speaking, though, Mike is right. I use a mapping app called Gaia for overland hiking stuff and hunting. And it has done really well for me. I really like that app. And again, they're not paying me to say that. It is what it is. But I always back that up with some other navigation, right? A Garmin, usually somewhere in my kit.
Yeah, there's a bunch of apps, like free applications that you can download offline maps. So even Google now lets you download offline maps you can have on your phone. If you know ahead of time, you can have it saved so that if you don't have cell service or data, it's there. But if you do have an old school map and you know how to use it, you can still get latitude and longitude like coordinates from the GPS on your phone without a map, right? It's not overlaid on a map. You got to figure out what to do with those coordinates, but you can still get them. That being said, the offline maps feature is really useful. I've used it for just travel, and I don't mean like going out in the woods, the backcountry. I mean like I go to Europe and I don't plan on having data turned on necessarily, but I can download offline maps and figure out how to go, like if I'm walking from my hotel to some museum and then I'm going to go find food or whatever, I can do all that using GPS and like navigation on my phone without cell service. So it's never going to be completely reliable. You have to caveat after caveat, right? Pace, right? Think about that. But that's a big one. And the thing that you have to layer into that, obviously in a survival situation, is battery life. So if you're trying desperately to get cell service to call for help, all that time that your phone spends searching for a signal and trying to connect, that's going to drain your battery. So be deliberate about when you're going to power your phone on. Remember that turning your phone off and then powering it up, that whole startup process, that also costs battery. So maybe just keeping it like screen off, lock mode, airplane mode, and low power mode. Close out all the apps that you're not using, and then periodically check for service from high ground. Like save your battery, but you can still do quite a bit of good while you do have battery in terms of navigation. Navigation also becomes a lot simpler, obviously, right? This is, I know it goes without saying, but like if you don't get lost in the first place, that helps, right? There is a difference between navigation, going from point A to point B, and figuring out what to do when you're lost. Those are different issues, right? Not getting lost in the first place, you want to build it into your process. So if you start with known things, known locations, and then whenever you wander away from that, figure out, how do I get back to where I was? Along the way, you should look behind you and kind of like, if you're on a trail or a route somewhere, look back the other direction and just take a minute and just see it, study it so that you've seen it before and you know you're back on track when you come back the other direction, right? You can mark where you've been. You can use like rock formations or flagging tape or something that you leave behind so that you know that you're back on track. And don't go too fast. Don't get too far ahead of yourself if you don't have to. Stop and periodically study and assess, like, hey, am I on the right track here? Look at your surroundings. Make sure that you're where you're supposed to be. If you wander off the path a little bit and you get a little bit lost, that's a lot easier to figure out than you haven't paid attention all morning or all afternoon, and now you're like, holy shit, I'm completely out of my way here. Back in the day, one of the little schools that I went to, we used to do a navigation checklist. If we were going to go do map and compass skills, like overland skills like this, they gave us a 7-step checklist where you can write all these things down and kind of study the map and where you're at and where you're going to come up with a list that will hopefully prevent you from getting lost and get you where you need to be. That checklist looks something like this, right? You have obviously your start point, your end point. First thing was to figure out the distance. What's the distance that you're going to be traveling? The second is, what direction or heading are you going to use? If you're using map and compass stuff, then layer that in. What direction or heading do I need to go, whatever distance? And that might look something, instead of maybe a heading on a compass, maybe it's roads, maybe it's landmarks, something like that, but have some sense of direction, right? Time. If you know about how fast you move and you know about how far you got to go, how much time should this journey take you? If you know, like, I should be there in a couple hours, and you start hitting hour 4 and you're like, wait a minute, I should have been there already. That's a clue, right? So have an idea of about how long it should take you to cover that distance. It really helps if you've ever looked at your pace to figure out, like, you know, how fast you move on a hike or run over different types of terrain. If you're carrying a backpack, if you're going uphill, downhill, if you've ever done those sorts of hikes and that sort of thing, and you have an idea of, I typically move about, 1.5 to 3 miles an hour, something like that, depending on the terrain. So if you look at your distance that you're going, the direction that you're going to go, and then you can kind of calculate about how long that should take. Some people will have that figured out down to like the number of steps or paces. They'll say, hey, like, they'll actually count their steps.
I can't count that high, but yes, it's a
Yeah,
thing that especially the Army does.
I can't either. There are people like you could use like Ranger beads. Some people even will carry like one of those little what's it called? Clickers.
Pedometer. Yeah.
Like the little clicker that like, you know, when they're counting people to go on the Ferris wheel at the fair or whatever, and they click how many people have come through. And they'll
It's 2024,
count.
we're a Fitbit if this is your thing, right?
Yeah, I mean now exactly like watches and phones will actually track some of that for you, and you can use that. So, but the idea would be like if you know that you cover, it takes you about this many steps to cover this kind of distance. You can also look at how many steps or paces that trip should take you. It's a little bit more relevant in like those overland, you're like in the middle of the woods kind of things than it would be probably most other environments. But back in the day when I took this class, it was on the list. So far we've got distance, heading or direction, time based on your pace, the number of steps or paces it's going to take you. Those are your first 4. And then you've got a description of the route and the terrain that you're going to be going over. So you're looking at the map and seeing what that's going to look like, usually a topographic map. A description of the route or the terrain. So, you know, I'm going to be crossing these rivers, these roads. I'm going to have a mountain over here on the left. I'm going to have some ridge line over here on the right. You have kind of a description of what that route looks like. The next one is the description of the destination. Hey, when I get there, it should look approximately like this. I should be at the top of a hill or low in a basin or near a stream or a road or a river, or there's a set of power lines or some train tracks, some description of your destination. And then finally, some description of what happens if I go too far. So if I hit this road or this ridge line or this landmark, then I know I went too far, right? Some indications that you're off track. So kind of doing that evaluation and making that checklist before you set off on your journey is a good way of hopefully preventing yourself from getting lost. I'll go over them one more time. Distance, heading or direction, the amount of time it should take you based on your pace or approximate pace, steps or paces if you're into that kind of thing, which you might not be, a description of the route or the terrain, a description of the destination, and a description of too far. Those are the 7 steps.
Yeah, and also 3 rules. Always know where you are. Always look cool. If you don't know where you are, at least make sure you look cool. Navigation gets a lot easier if you cheat. Study the map before you ever go out into an isolated situation. If you're not expecting the isolated situation, it helps if you have a basic mental map of wherever it is you are to begin with, right? If you're going to travel to a weird place, go ahead and really study the map. When you study that map, ask yourself what the get well direction is, right? If all else fails, if I go north, I'm going to hit the road, or I go south, I'm going to hit the river, right? Stuff like that. And consider where the natural handrails are to help you navigate. Well, as long as I generally keep this road on my right or this river on my left, I'm going to get where I want to go. Okay. And when we say navigation, we don't just mean your orientation on the map. This is also the category of figuring out how you're going to get around, right? Walking, bicycle, car. Let's say you're a 4-wheeler. You're going to go out into the desert and drive your 4-wheel drive around. Has anyone who drives a 4-wheel drive ever jacked up their 4-wheel drive out in the middle of the desert?
Nah.
Okay. So when your axle breaks, how you gonna get home there, bud? This is the navigation piece. You gonna walk? You gonna phone a friend? Do you have a pace plan? Right. So I phone a friend. Well, I don't have cell coverage. Okay. Well, now what? Okay. This happened to me recently. I was mountain biking with my family around a reservoir lake. And not a huge one, but you know, we're on the far side of the lake, and all of a sudden I hear a hiss because the valve stem of my back tire came off. So then I had to figure out, like, okay, how am I going to get out of here? I had to basically carry the bike or walked what was left of the bike all the way around to get to the car, right? So always have a backup plan as far as how you're going to get around. That is part of your navigation question. So speaking of pace, signaling is a big part of this. In modern times, signaling almost always means your cell phone, right? And rightly so. Your cell phone is amazing. It connects you to all the knowledge in the world. It connects you to emergency services. It has a flashlight built into it. It has a GPS built into it. You can call an Uber. That's one of your get-arounds, right? Cool. It is also a single point of failure problem for you. And in survival, we hate single point of failure problems. Let me say that again. This is a big deal. In survival, we hate single point of failure problems. Okay, that's the pace thing.
Lack of
so
redundancy.
I need you to, so I need you to pace the capabilities of your cell phone. Whatever you rely on in it, I need you to have somewhere else also. If your land navigation plan is Google Maps, I need you to have some sort of separate, physically separate backup. If your ability to call for help is AT&T or Verizon, I need you to have a backup. Maybe that's Garmin with like the InReach capability where you hit the 911 button. Maybe that's making sure you have a buddy who also has a cell phone. Maybe that means you bring a battery pack to give your cell phone the best odds of helping you if you get stuck somewhere. Signaling is also where I've been, things like flashlights, glow sticks, stuff that's reflective. Do you have a flashlight? In situations I find myself in, namely fumbling around in the dark in an airplane, I don't want just a flashlight. I want a couple of them. I usually want one bright, surefire streamlight type light. I want a headlamp so I can keep my hands free. And I need a little LED light. Signaling also generally includes your plan for reporting that you're in trouble. Mike hit on this a little bit earlier. That could be a deliberate signal that you put out, like a cell phone call to 911, or hitting the emergency button on a satellite widget, or spelling out HELP in a clearing. And that actually came up recently. I think it was Western North Carolina in the flooding.
After the hurricanes.
An HH-60, a Air Force rescue helicopter, plucked someone off the road because they had spray painted help in the middle of the road, right? But it also includes a missed contact procedure. At what point should your friends and family start to worry about you? And at what point should they activate the rescue process? If you go into the backcountry, don't just expect your family and friends to know what you know, right? So help them out. Leave a trip plan with a buddy and leave a trip plan on the dash of your car. That makes it way, way, way easier to find you if you get in trouble. Another thing I want to talk about is sanitation. Everybody wants to talk about night vision and their 300 blackout with their silenced guns,
all
and
the
nobody
sexy
wants
stuff.
to talk. Yeah, nobody wants to talk about having some trash bags and a poop shovel. Well, here's
Wet
the
wipes.
thing. Yeah,
For real, though.
Yeah, especially once you're eating the gross stuff, you're going to want them butt wipes. Let me tell you. So I can't guarantee that you're going to be in a gunfight at night against the Russian Spetsnaz. Okay. I can pretty well guarantee you're going to need to poop.
that you're not, though.
Yeah, it's true. But you know what I can guarantee? You're probably going to need to poop at some point. And also you're going to need to eat at some point. And you don't want one anywhere near the other. You don't want poop germs in your food. That's how you get yourself dehydrated. And that's how you get not 98.6. Okay. Also, in a survival situation, you have to assume someone has been hurt or killed. And you're going to have to deal with that. Someone who is hurt or someone who is killed. And one thing that really, really stands out about nature is how fast the bugs show up. That is one thing I can also guarantee you out in nature is the bugs are going to show up, especially where people have been hurt or killed. Nature's all about that, right? So, what do you need to pack with you? I don't know. It could be a trowel. It could be a bottle of hand sanitizer. It could be a trash bag.
Wet wipes.
Butt wipes. Sure. What do you need for disaster prep? I'm actually pretty serious. You need like big, heavy trash bags, and you never know what you're going to have to put in them. Okay. Bleach. That's a thing I probably want. Am I going to carry it hiking? Probably not. Do I want some in my garage? Absolutely yes. Okay. Another thing is first aid. We have several episodes now about first aid. But within this episode, what I want you to think about in terms of first aid is for basic survival, probably 2 layers. I need you to think about the boo-boos, and I need you to think about the trauma stuff. For boo-boos, I want you to have Band-Aids, antiseptic, probably something to help you with blisters. What's the camel
Moleskin.
toe? What's that?
Moleskin.
Moleskin. That's it. That's what I was thinking. Okay. You should probably also pack some pills, right? Some anti-inflammatories, because you're going to get hurt, and a little Advil can help a lot. A little Motrin and water. Fresh socks. I learned that in the military. Fresh socks and Motrin solve most of your problems. I want you to have pills that will make you poo, and I want you to have pills that will make you stop pooing. Again, if you get...
I bet a lot of people weren't prepared for how much we're going to talk about poop in this episode.
A lot of poop. Because that's how you get the bugs, too. So here's the thing. Like, a quick way to make yourself not 98.6 is getting dehydrated, and this is how you get there, right? So, like, sounds gross, matters a lot. Yep. And this is stuff people don't want to talk about. But guess what? I want you to live. This is the thing that'll help you live. For trauma, I want you to be able to stop the bleeding. And I want you to think about how you're going to get rescue to you, or how you're going to get yourself to rescue. Okay? And consider you might be out there for a while. So you got someone hurt overnight while you're waiting for rescue to show up. How are you going to keep them alive? How are you going to keep that hurt person 98.6? And a lot of this is actually part of the March sequence, right? The trauma care. What's the H in March? Hypothermia, right? So do we have one of those little Mylar space blankets, little reflective blankets that we can wrap someone up in?
Or a fire?
Do we have fire? Do we have something?
Yeah. Maybe rescue's not coming till the morning. And so keeping them warm might mean environmental stuff.
Yeah. So shifting gears, I want to talk about REI. REI has made a lot of money over the years putting people out into the woods, and most of them have come back, which is cool. And so they have developed a list and a lot of institutional knowledge about this. They're not paying me to say that. It just is what it is. REI does a lot of recreational education. They have a list of 10 essentials. And you'll see they're very related to the stuff I rattled off, that we rattled off, right? One is navigation. Map, compass, altimeter. I don't think you necessarily need an altimeter, but that's fine if you're hiking up Everest. Maybe you do. A GPS device, some sort of personal locator beacon, satellite messenger. Okay, cool. I agree. Number 2 is a headlamp, plus extra batteries. If it needs batteries, you're going to need more of them. Good idea. Number 3, sun protection, sunglasses, sun protective clothes, and sunscreen. Totally agree. I count that as part of your shelter plan. 4, first aid, including foot care and insect repellent. Hey, where have I heard that before? The bugs will show up. 5, a knife, plus a gear repair kit. I like knives. Knives are great. 6, fire. You need matches, lighter, tinder, or a stove. I agree, you need some way to make fire. You need probably a couple of ways to make fire. 7, shelter, carried at all times. That might be just a poncho, but you need something, okay? 8, extra food, beyond your minimum. I agree. I think that's a great idea. If all you bring is a power bar, well, what happens when you end up stuck out there a day or 2 or 3 or 5, okay? Extra water. True, but again, water's heavy, so you either need to carry it or you need to have a way to find more. Extra clothing beyond your minimum expectation. Socks will make your life a lot happier.
Oh, yeah.
A jacket, something for if it gets much colder or much hotter. You need to have a plan for that. So that is their list of things to buy mostly, and they've got their own agenda with that, but you'll see that it kind of meshes up with what we're talking about. When we talk about the food, water, fire, shelter, knots, navigation, sanitation, signaling stuff, that's not so much a list of things to carry. Again, it's the considerations, the things I need you to address and questions I need you to answer. I don't care what brand of knife you carry. I don't care whether you carry a Leatherman or a Gerber or K-Bar. I don't care. I care that you have a plan for how to keep yourself 98.6.
Yeah, so the last thing that I want to add to this list, or these lists that we've talked about, which we touched on in the beginning, but maybe not in these words, but I do actually think it deserves a bullet point in your quote-unquote packing list when you're thinking about all of this. And probably at the top, right, is a positive mental attitude. And we talked about the framing and the mindset stuff and some of that psychology and the imagery. I love Jim's point, and it echoes a quote that I stole from Craig Douglas of ShivWorks, and that is, mindset is not a verb. You can't mindset your way out of trouble. You have to problem solve. And sometimes your choices are shitty and shittier. And like we always say on the show, you can't just throw your hands up at that, right? And
what's that movie? The guy gets stuck in a cave and he's got to like cut his own arm off with a pocket knife.
drawing a blank.
Someone jump in the comments. Tell us what that movie is.
Is that the volleyball one, the Tom Hanks?
No. It's a true story. The guy had to cut his own arm off.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. That's what he does. So.
But, in all of that, positive mental attitude, right? In all of that, you have to find hope. You have to make the best with what you got. And the best way you can do that on the front end before the crisis is to think about and manage risk, think about and plan contingencies, build resilience, do hard things, struggle well, and recognize that plenty of people have perished in situations that were winnable. And they had all the gadgets and the gear they needed, and they weren't that far from help, and yet they didn't make it because they wallowed in self-pity or they got consumed in despair or whatever, and they gave up. And we've heard plenty of stories where people had nothing and overcame insurmountable odds and prevailed in situations that most people would think were impossible to win. That mindset, it's not a packing list item, right? But it is something you want to think about in terms of positivity. Okay, what are the worst case scenarios here? The worst case scenarios are, I get stuck, I fall down a ravine, I this or that or the other thing. What are my pace plans for that? How do I go through the what ifs, right? It doesn't come in a vacuum. This is something that is part of who you are, so you have to train and live that way accordingly.
So I think my final thoughts, one, pack a buddy. Having a friend makes a big difference in a lot of this. And the other is cheat. If you're in a fair fight in survival, you're screwing it up, right? So can you drink your own pee? I don't know. I saw that on a Bear Grylls episode back in the day. I guess maybe you probably could. It's a bad idea. Most of the survival books I've read are like, no, that's a terrible idea. So could you? I don't know. Maybe. Great. But you know what's better than that? Carry a bottle of goddamn water. So do that. Okay. You know what's better than banging rocks together? A Bic lighter. Yeah. So do that. Right. One of my favorite survival instructors back in the day used to talk about like, you do want to be able to bang rocks together and make a fire, but, or you could take a road flare and stick it up against a tree. Yeah. What do you think I'm going to do if I'm freezing to death? Right. And so like, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And, I think that's my big thing. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy getting out, out into nature. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, get outside and get some fresh air.
And my goal is I don't just want you to survive. I want you to thrive. And I also want you to thrive well enough that you can help other people to survive. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Agreed. And a positive mental attitude.
All right. Be safe out there. Be smart out there.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can have a Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.